Hi, hello, welcome to Curious Fridays, a segment of the channel dedicated to tidbits of history that may be a little bit more obscure than you're used to. So if that sounds like something you'd like, please subscribe to my channel. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So many of us, so many of you are here on YouTube for one reason. We want to know. We want to know the details. We want to know who did it, how, when, why. We have a weird craving for the macabre. Whether it is because we want to learn about the psyche of psychos, because we want to know that justice can be served, or we want to get pissed at justice because it doesn't work, or because we're only interested in the gory details, in which case weird, but okay. We're here because true crime is a genre that fascinates us and compels us to sleuth and sometimes become armchair detectives. And one thing I've been wondering is, how and when did this genre come to be? So I did my research, and in this video I'm going to explore as best as I can the origins and development of true crime. So let's start with the basics. What is true crime? According to the trustworthy Wikipedia, it's a non-fiction literary podcast and film genre in which the author examines an actual crime and details the actions of real people. So, true crime is a non-fiction genre that analyzes crime's various natures: murders, extortions, kidnappings, and the public seems to be particularly drawn to serial killers. But we need to go back to the beginning to get the full picture of this fascination. The origins of true crime can be traced back to the Renaissance period, the time of history when humanity went from darkness to light, in most areas. At the time, the genre was not written because books were a luxury reserved to the upper class, the clergy, the royals, and the majority of the population could not read anyway. So, sordid details of crimes were told orally and through ballads for the benefit of the illiterate population. In time, some of those ballads were transcribed by scholars. During the Elizabethan era, after the invention of the printing press in the 15th century and the slow rise of literacy among middle-class people, the distribution of crime ballads in the form of broadsides and pamphlets increased. They became tabloids containing true crime narratives that delved into the most ghastly details of crimes, all for the enjoyment of the public. Ballads containing heinous crimes or court procedures were usually printed in broadsides and posted around towns. They usually included very graphic woodcuts of murders for people to contemplate the anatomy of human beings after their life had been taken away from them. Dismemberment, torture, witchcraft, nothing was out of limits. The 18th century ballad, The Cruel Gamekeeper, describes in detail the murder of a pregnant woman whose fetus is cut from her womb by her partner. "I will not marry yet," said he, "for while I'm single I'm free." From his pocket a knife he drew, and pierced her tender body through. He ripped her up, and there was by a babe in her womb did cry. He then did hide among the thorns the baby crawling in her arms. And Jesus Christ, if we grab a newspaper, we'll see that humans have not changed that much because shit like that still happens today. Anyway, I digress. These ballads, recounts, poems, or however you want to call them, were generally considered to be devoid of any literary craftsmanship. They weren't produced as a form of art. They were written for public consumption, and they weren't necessarily factual either. In fact, sometimes they were completely fictionalized. The first true crime book in English was published in 1636 by John Reynolds. It was called The Triumph of God's Revenge Against the Crying and Execrable Sin of Murder. It was a collection of accounts of murders that were always followed by a moral message with a religious undertone. And one of the most popular samples of narratives was the Newgate Calendar, also known as, give me a minute, The Newgate Calendar of Malefactors' bloody register containing general and circumstantial narratives of the lives and transactions, various exploits and dying speeches of the most notorious criminals of both sexes, who suffered death punishment in Great Britain and Ireland for high treason, petty treason, murder, piracy, felony, thieving, highway robberies, forgery, rape, bigamy, burglaries, riots, and various other horrid crimes and misdemeanors. Well, that was fun to say. The Newgate Calendar was issued between the 18th and 19th century, and it presented a collection of true crime accounts, arrests, and executions of perpetrators. Meanwhile, across the pond in the USA, the earliest form of true crime literature was the Puritan execution sermons, which were delivered before hanging. They were another medium for preaching the Calvinist doctrine. They contain a combination of morbid details of a crime and a stern moral lecture. After the execution, the sermons were printed and then sold as pamphlets. And now let's move on to the 19th century. During the Victorian era, true crime writing became more secular and even more sensationalized, if you can believe it. During the 1820s, a subgenre that took inspiration from the Newgate Calendar was born. The Newgate novel. It was generally considered to be a low-brow form of literature that glamorized the lives of criminals and tried to make the readers side with them by depicting them as heroes. So yeah, that was a thing that happened. And between 1845 and 1848, George Reynolds published a book called The Mysteries of London, which were sold for 1 cent and came to be known as penny dreadfuls. So this is where the name of the subgenre comes from, just in case you were wondering. At this point in time, renowned authors became interested in crime. Some examples are Charles Dickens with A Visit to Newgate from 1836, William Thackeray with Going to See a Man Hanged, 1840, and perhaps the most well-known true crime essays were On Murder Considered as One of the Fine Arts from 1927, and a second paper from 1939 by Thomas de Quincey. These essays, De Quincey explored the Radcliffe murders of 1811, in which 7 people were murdered in the East End of London. He explores the mind of the presumed killer, John Williams, the victims and the witnesses in a way that had not been done before. It moved beyond the horrific acts and used literary devices to make his audience question their voyeuristic fascination with crime. The essays are considered to be the predecessors of books like In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. During the 1830s and 40s, law enforcement began to solidify as an institution in both England and the United States, and soon real lifelike detectives and constables began to emerge in literature. Most notably, Sherlock Holmes began to be published in the Strand magazine in 1887. It's at this point when fact and fiction become more and more intertwined, with authors publishing embellished fictionalized writings. For example, to name a few, Edgar Allan Poe, Wilkie Collins, Robert Browning, Oscar Wilde, among many others. In 1876, Celia Thaxter's essay, A Memorable Murder, was published in America. Thaxter wrote about 2 female acquaintances that were killed near the New Hampshire coast. It's a non-fiction work that relies on sentimental storytelling. And here we have another precursor to Capote's writing style, someone who juxtaposed fictional techniques to shocking narrations of heinous crimes. Now let's move on to the 20th and 21st centuries. The interest in true crime never really died down, though the genre was still considered inferior to other types of literature because it was usually relegated to cheap pulp magazines, and it was generally considered that authors only resorted to writing true crime as a way of making a quick buck. But all of that changed when Truman Capote decided to write about a murdered family from Kansas. In Cold Blood was published in 1966, and not only did it become a commercial success, but it also received accolades for its literary craft. Capote was not the inventor of true crime, but he certainly paved the way for other major works of literature like Helter Skelter by Vincent Bugliosi, Fatal Vision by Joey McGeans, The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule, and I'm sure that you can come up with many more examples of authors that are now considered classic, and also contemporary authors with excellent materials. If you can and you want, please leave your favorites down below so that I can check them out. However, this isn't all that there is by any means. As technology advanced, true crime found new channels of expression. Documentaries, series, films, podcasts, whole YouTube channels dedicated to the topic at hand inundate the web, and we seem to not be able to get enough of it. At its core, true crime has not changed that much. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. True crime is here to satiate our unquenchable thirst for the sensational. It can be exploitative. But thankfully, collective awareness of a wide set of social issues that affect true crime, like racial and gender discrimination, lack of proper police work, miscarriages of justice, and we could keep going on and on listing things, has gifted us with content creators that work in the true crime field with the purpose of making a difference. It is still a bizarre form of entertainment, but those creators do their best to bring exposure to cases that need it. Unsolved murders, disappearances, John and Jane Doe cases. They work with diligence, delicacy, and respect and try to honor victims while educating their audiences. If you're curious, my favorites are Stephanie Harlow, Georgia Marie, Joshua Miles, Kendall Ray, and Kaylee Elise was also fantastic. She was absolutely brilliant. She's no longer in the platform, unfortunately, and I think she deleted her channel. But I think it was for the better, and I hope she's doing excellent. Those are some of my favorites, and you're invited to tell me about yours in the comment section. So this is where I'm at. I left out a lot of information. I did found some very interesting books online, but unfortunately I could not get access to those. So maybe in the future I could expand on this video, who knows. But remember to never take my words for granted. My sources will be listed down below. Take a look at them. Always do your own research, and you're always welcome to correct me. I just ask you to be respectful about it. Remember to like the video, subscribe, leave a comment, you know what to do. And I'll see you next week with more content.